Hey, what's up? My name is Tyson Brown and I want to welcome you to Tyson's Fitness Tips podcast. This is Australia's top health and fitness podcast to help you lose weight, look good with your shirt off, feel confident in your body, and finally achieve the goals you want with your health and fitness. So 5 days a week, I'm going to be giving you top information from myself and also from leading experts in the field so you know everything you need to do to get in the best shape of your life. From nutrition to mindset to workout, everything is covered in this podcast and you need to go nowhere else. So like I said, it's going to be 5 days a week, Monday to Friday, in your ears with quick actionable segments that you can implement straight away, because the most important thing is that you can put these things into play. Also, if you listen all the way to the end of the episode, you're going to get 2 special gifts that you can download upon listening to it. So make sure you listen all the way to the end to get those free gifts, okay? So let's get into the episode. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Tyson's Fitness Tips. Again, it is 4:30 here in the morning on one side of the world, and over the other side of the world, it's in the afternoon. And the person I brought on today, I'm super pumped up about it because this guy, he's been a trainer for over 25 years, and he's a doctor who specializes in integrative endocrinology, which means basically he knows all about the hormones and metabolism. So I thought Dr. J would be great to bring on today because I was thinking, what's an area we haven't covered on the podcast yet? And I thought about, we've talked about different diets, we've talked about different workout routines, but we haven't talked about something special that Dr. Jade talks about, which is metabolic flexibility. And this guy not only walks the walk, but he obviously talks the talk with himself and his clients. So I thought, let's bring him on today and let's find out a little bit more about it. So Dr. Jade, thank you so much for coming on today, mate.
Tyson, good to see you, man. Thanks for having me.
No worries. So, can you give us a bit of a background, first of all, for the people who don't know you? Can you tell us a little bit about your backstory and where you are, like what you've come to do at the moment?
Yeah, probably the best way to think about me is I am 25 years as a personal trainer. So, kind of throw that into the blender. And then I went to medical school, and you want to throw a little bit of that into the blender, but I will kind of make a little caveat here. With medicine here in the United States, there's sort of the conventional route that you could take, which is sort of drug surgery. And then there's sort of the unconventional route that you could take that focuses more on nutrition, lifestyle medicine, supplements, mindset, that kind of stuff. And I went sort of the unconventional route. And at the time that I did that, it wasn't really popular. It was kind of considered, like witchcraft medicine or very out there. I had no idea at that time that it was going to turn into such a, demanding, or a thing that was in such demand, let's put it that way. And so I really come at, the medical practice from both the conventional mindset. I'm not opposed to drugs and surgery, and certainly will prescribe drugs if necessary. But I more come at it from lifestyle, nutrition, supplements, good sleep, stress management, that kind of stuff. So, this personal training background, this sort of medical, alternative medicine background, and then sort of a really deep dive into psychology and philosophy, which is what I spend most of my time sort of reading for pleasure, is psychology, philosophy, that kind of thing. And I guess my area of expertise for those who know what the term endocrinology means, it's sort of the study of hormones. I've become known as sort of, one of the premier integrative endocrinologists in the country, meaning that, I basically focus on how hormones impact our health and how diseases impact hormones and how especially hormones can help us lose weight and build muscle and sort of manage our health and fitness. And so I think that kind of gives you an idea of where I'm coming from. To sum it all up, it's really I focus on 3 areas. It's mind, set, muscle, and metabolism. And that's where I spend most of my time.
That is such an awesome background you've had. You've come from all areas and being able to put that together to become what you are today. I think it's a really cool, when you start to combine things and you look at them, how they can work together with the body, because we're not one separate thing. So it's really cool that you've been able to bring those things together.
You want to know what's interesting about that is at the time when you're doing it, when you're young, you kind of have an idea of what that might look like. but you're kind of confused about it. And so I feel very fortunate to have been able to put all these things together and make it coherent, because it certainly wasn't like that through most of my career. You know what I mean? It's like I didn't realize that I was going to get to this point. It's one of these sort of interesting things where you're going along and then they all tie in together. And I've been able to do that, which has been wonderful.
That's so cool. And so, Jade, you've had a lot of experience over the years, like you said, with mindset, with metabolism, and also muscle. So, bringing that together, like I read an article you read recently, which is really important, which is about metabolic flexibility, and which is what I wanted to talk to you about today. So, what exactly is metabolic flexibility?
Yeah, so I love that we're talking about this topic, because I think for a very long time, metabolism has been misunderstood. Not just a little bit, but tremendously misunderstood. And that has translated into people not being able to really get the results they want out of diet and exercise. It has translated into frustration for people when they, sort of try to change their body. And I think a large degree of that is because they don't really understand how the metabolism works. And so if you want to understand metabolic flexibility, the first thing you have to understand is how the metabolism actually functions. And the way it functions is as sort of this adaptive, reactive system. A lot of times people say the metabolism is like a calculator. Some people say it's like a chemistry set. It's more like a boomerang or a seesaw or a rubber band. It's basically, if you push against it, it will push back against you. It's flexible, it's adaptive, it's reactive. And in very sort of real terms, what that means is that if you and I, Tyson, are all of a sudden washed up on, an imaginary island where all we have to eat is fat sources, our metabolism, a healthy metabolism, should be able to adapt to use that fat, ramp up its fat burning biochemistry, and get energy out of fat. If we instead were washed up on an island that was filled with sugar, we should be able to use that sugar and be flexible enough in our fuel sources. So very simply, metabolic flexibility means I can change my metabolism based on what is available for me, activity life is demanding me to do. And the truth of the matter is, most people have lost the ability to be metabolically flexible. And this is part of the reason why, if I tell you, hey, I want you to stop eating all carbohydrates and go on a keto diet and just start eating fat, a lot of people will, for the first little bit of time there, will feel sick and almost feel like they have flu symptoms because their metabolism is not flexible enough. It's the reason why, if I tell you I want you to fast for 24 hours, some people who are metabolically inflexible will get shaky and lightheaded and dizzy because they have not built this flexibility into their metabolism. So their metabolism becomes very rigid. It's kind of like if we use that rubber band example. Some people have these big, thick, elastic rubber bands that you can pull as hard as you want and they'll never snap. Other people have these sort of frozen, rigid, sort of frayed rubber bands that as soon as you pull on them in any direction, they immediately snap. And so if you really want to get a handle of your metabolism, you want to rebuild metabolic flexibility into them. And I'll give you one hint and then I'll shut up. But this is basically how it works. The same way that you build mental resilience by exposing yourself to change and challenge and taking on fears and those kinds of things is the same way you regain metabolic flexibility. You have to challenge your metabolism. You have to teach it to be changeable. And this is very different than what most people do. They instead go, well, I got to eat less and exercise more. And I got to eat less and exercise more. And I got to eat less and exercise more. And that one singular focus of just eating less and exercising more makes for a very rigid metabolism. And eventually, you can't do anything with it, if that makes sense.
It's funny, the way you describe that. With that analogy, because it makes complete sense with when you would look back in our ancestral days, we didn't always have access to carbohydrates really at all, but having access to a certain food source all the time wasn't like that. So our body would learn to go for a certain period of time without food or a higher fat diet or whatever it was going to be, and we were able to adapt. But because of this day and age where we can just have food at our fingertips, literally, like at an Uber Eats disorder. It's so easy for people to constantly be fed and never learn what hunger is. And like you said, when they go into, if there's any type of fasting, like I realized this when I would train some clients in the morning, and all of a sudden they would start to get nauseous. And it's simply because their body wasn't used to having empty glycogen stores. And I was like, wow, this is crazy. Like, I can train on an empty stomach and I don't feel anything. But realizing that not everyone has that flexibility yet, which they can develop, not having it yet can be a huge detriment on their health.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say that, because that's exactly what we do. See, here's the interesting thing. If you take the paleo man, which I think is a good place to start, our ancestral human, they did not have the ability, if they fasted all day, let's say, and they didn't eat anything for 24 hours, they didn't have the ability, even if their brother and sister caught a big wildebeest and brought home a bunch of blueberries or something like that, they couldn't consume 2,000 calories, much over 2,000 calories in a sitting, because that wildebeest would have been very lean. The protein would have been very filling. Berries and greens don't have a whole lot of calories. And so they didn't have the ability to consume 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 calories in one sitting. But we today do. And so there are people who fast and then end up at a place like the Cheesecake Factory here in the United States. I don't know if they have that in Australia, but here they have this place called the Cheese Factory where, one slice of cheesecake is 1,000 calories and the meal is, 2,000 to 500 calories. And people will consume like this, or they'll eat a whole pizza after fasting all day. And here's what you need to know for those people like you and me who have a relatively flexible metabolism and can go all day without eating and then eat sensible and not have excessive hunger and cravings. The metabolically inflexible will have the exact opposite effect. Not only will the fast make them dizzy and lightheaded and feel pretty shitty, but it will also cause a ridiculous amount of hunger and cravings that, sort of leave those people vulnerable to binge eating behavior. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes I can't say it doesn't make sense, because of course, people not being used to going without food for a long period of time, like there's signals that are sent from the body, it goes into I guess you'd say a stress mode. Is that right?
Absolutely. That's exactly what's happening. I mean, so to kind of get into the biochemistry of this, there's sort of what I call there's sort of three mechanisms. So if you imagine your metabolism and its flexibility, almost imagine it like it's a water wheel, right? And this water wheel is sort of turning, and when it's turning, it's flexible. And there's certain things that can make it unflexible. Perhaps instead of putting water into the water wheel, you start dumping sand into the water wheel. And perhaps there's someone at the bottom of the water wheel with, that's banging the water wheel every time it comes around. And perhaps the water wheel engine's a little bit too fast. And so over time, this water wheel starts to fray and begins to break down. That is analogous to eating very large meals, very frequently, and then eating for a long period of time during the day. So in other words, we humans tend to, in the modern day, eat at least 3 times per day, if not more. That's one hit on the water wheel. We tend to make those meals pretty big and mixed, meaning there's a lot of carb, fat, sugar, protein, everything in that meal all at once. That's the second hit at on the water wheel. And we also tend to eat from 8 o'clock in the morning when we wake up till 11 o'clock when we go to bed. And so we're mostly eating all day long. And this begins to overwhelm the metabolic architecture and starts to disrupt and destroy our metabolic water wheel. And then we are unable to respond to diet and exercise appropriately, because as soon as we try to change our eating patterns, eat less at a meal, eat only 12 hours during the day instead of 18 hours during our day, or eat less frequently, we get hunger, we get energy lows and unpredictability, we get cravings, we get sleep disturbances, we get mood issues, and then we want to go back and consume those foods to fix that issue. And we get in this sort of feed forward negative cycle. And you mentioned stress, and the reason I went through that whole diatribe right there is because most people think stress is this emotional state, right? It's like, well, I feel anxious or I feel depressed. The best way to measure stress on the metabolism is hunger. Hunger is a stress response. Cravings. Cravings is a stress response. Unpredictable and unstable energy is a stress response. Mood disruption is a stress response. Sleep disturbance is a stress response. For women, changes in menstrual cycle is a stress response. For men, changes in libido, that's a stress response. And so we have all these biofeedback mechanisms at our disposal to tell us whether we are under stress or not. And I can tell you this, if your metabolism is under stress, and it's under stress for a long period of time like that, you are building an inflexible metabolism, which means any diet or exercise regime you try is going to be very, very difficult for some or almost impossible for others. And this is what most people are up against. And so this is why one-size-fits-all approaches also don't work when it comes to restoring metabolic flexibility. But I did give you some hints, right, Tyson? Like we talked, like right there off the bat, you have some hints about what restoring metabolic flexibility looks like. Well, we can reduce the size of our meals. We can reduce the frequency of our meals. We can reduce the mix of our meals, meaning that if a meal is all fat, it's easier to digest and assimilate than if it's all fat, protein, and carbs. So single macronutrient meals are a little bit better for metabolic flexibility. And we can eat for a shorter window of time during the day. All of these things can help us restore some metabolic flexibility. And of course, you and I know this is because this is what we do for a living, but one of the best ways to restore metabolic flexibility is exercise. As a matter of fact, they have shown in research that even diabetics who go through an exercise session are rendered non-diabetic sometimes for a short period of time after the exercise session. That's how amazing exercise can be, you know, in terms of restoring metabolic flexibility. And so that begins to give you a hint of sort of what we're up against. So does that make sense? And is there anything you want to, I'm interested in your take on that and then anywhere you want to go from that. But I know it's a big, long, sort of complicated process. So hopefully people are following discussion, but we can get into all the particulars if you want.
Yeah, for sure. I think the biggest, like one of the biggest things that you said there, like the information that you gave about what's going to happen if you start to try these things, like, you know, hunger, mood, sleep, all those things. Like people need to be aware of what those symptoms are because like at first, if your body is not used to being flexible, like that is what's going to happen and you have to expect this to happen. And a lot of people just think it's going to be an easy transition from, let's say, going from one diet to another or trying to go longer without food, like, you know, trying a longer term fast and things like that. But you are going to experience these things that you probably haven't experienced in a while or if ever, but that doesn't mean that it's wrong. It means that your body's trying to adapt and become flexible towards that type of style of eating and diet.
That's right. And think about this, Tyson. Here's a good analogy for you and me and everyone listening to think about. So let's say that you and I want to quit smoking, right? Let's say you, me, and a group of our friends. We all are smokers and we want to stop smoking. We all know that some of us are going to just be able to quit cold turkey, right? We're going to just be like, I'm not having another cigarette. I'm going to willpower it out. And some of us are going to be successful in that. Some of us are going to be able to be like, you know what? I'm going to slowly wean off. Today I'm going to have a pack of cigarettes only. Then next week I'll do a half a pack. And then I'll slowly wean myself off. And some people are going to be successful in that way. And then other people are going to need like some Nicorette gum or something like that, some nicotine gum to sort of help them along to make the transition. And the thing is every single one of those strategies can be useful for certain people to quit smoking. Same thing goes for nutrition with metabolic flexibility. For some people, they can move right to a keto diet or intermittent fasting. And those things are wonderful to restore metabolic flexibility. That would be like the example of quitting nicotine right off the bat, just cold turkey, stop smoking. Some people can do that. Other people are going to need to start with small, frequent meals gain some metabolic flexibility, and then go to less frequent meals, gain some more metabolic flexibility, then go to maybe half a day of fasting, gain a little bit more, and slowly regain their metabolic flexibility. This would be like slowly weaning off of cigarettes. And then some people are going to need a little bit of help. They're going to need some help. This would be the example of doing an intermittent fasting type regime, except using whey protein as a morning meal and a lunch meal, or a functional food to help you get through the most difficult times. And we all need to sort of understand that we need to individualize this approach to getting our metabolic flexibility back, if that makes sense. And hopefully that begins to help the practitioner who works with people, or the individual listening to this podcast, essentially go, okay, I get it. I know that I'm going to have to individualize this, and I have to honor my own process in restoring my metabolic function.
You know, it's such an important point that you made there about that, because like you said, everyone is different, and there's no shame, there's no right or wrong saying, oh, you know, I can't go cold turkey. Like, there's nothing wrong with that, because you have a certain personality type, you have a certain trait, and you have to honor that, and you have to work with yourself to make it successful in the long run.
Yeah, you do. And here's one thing I would say about a caveat for people, because we like to talk about the idea of speeding up the metabolism, right? And we do not want to speed up the metabolism. It's kind of the worst thing you can do, because anytime you try to speed up the metabolism, what else do you speed up? You speed up hunger, you speed up cravings, you speed up, energy depletion, you speed up sort of the stress response. This is why cold water therapy is shown to speed up the metabolism, but it really doesn't show to reduce weight. This is why getting in the sauna can speed up metabolism, but it alone won't reduce your weight. This is why exercise has been shown to speed up metabolism, but also a lot of people offset that with increased calorie intake. And so what we really want is to realize that we don't want a fast metabolism. We want a flexible metabolism, and we don't want to try to restore that flexibility with a one-size-fits-all approach. We want to restore that flexibility with an individualized approach. And this is the conversation in my mind that people are not having. And this is the conversation I think that we need to have.
Absolutely. And it's just, I'm just trying to think, like, why we don't have this type of conversation more when it's such an important thing. Like, it needs to be brought to the forefront more, because like the more aware we become, this, the easier it's going to be to make that transition.
Yeah, and here's why I think it's the case. It's funny, I was having this conversation with a friend of mine this morning. When people make change, oftentimes what we need to start with a plan, right? We kind of need help, right? Because if I tell you, hey, you got to find your own way, you're going to say, okay, Jade, that's all well and good that I find my own way, but that's kind of hard to do if I don't know where I'm starting. So can you give me a starting place? I can give you meal plans. I can give you workout programs. I can give you, recipes. But at some point, you're going to have to take those recipes and make them your own. Bruce Lee, who's one of my heroes, has a saying. He says, absorb what is useful, discard what is not, and add what is uniquely your own. And so when you approach diet, I can give you the beginning steps, but to restore your metabolic flexibility and to individualize this, you need to say, you know what, Jade, I know you told me I should have eggs in the morning, but number one, I'm not hungry in the morning, and number two, I don't like eggs. Then guess what? You need to change that and basically be like, you know what, I'm not hungry at lunch, so I'm gonna not eat at lunch instead, and I'm gonna have breakfast, and I don't like eggs, so I'm gonna have, a whey protein shake, or eat leftover chicken and broccoli from the other morning. And so whenever people get into these conversations, they have difficulty with it because they can't see past the sort of one-size-fits-all meal plans and diet books and blogs. And we just have this sort of, as humans, we have this sort of certainty trigger. We want certainty above all else. And so we want to be told by Jade or Tyson or someone else, tell me exactly what to do. It's also the reason why we inevitably fail. And so what I suggest to people is Start with any program you want. It doesn't really matter what you do so long as you realize you're going to have to tweak it and adjust it and adapt it to fit you. It's almost like, rather than being a dieter, you're almost like a detective, right? You're playing metabolic detective. How do I restore metabolic function through doing this? And there's a lot of science when we're talking about metabolic flexibility. There's a lot of science, that we can sort of get into about, insulin resistance and how stress impacts us and all this kind of stuff. But we already covered the high end sort of understanding of this. Your biofeedback, how you feel, hunger, energy, craving, sleep, mood. Actually, I have a little acronym for people to remember this. Sleep, hunger, mood, energy, and cravings. SHMEC, SHMEC. If your SHMEC is in check, then your metabolism is probably balanced. If your SHMEC is out of check, then your metabolism is probably under stress and inflexible. So what you want to do is get your SHMEC in check, and that's going to be different for everybody. I can give people, because I know they're going to want it, I can give you a place to start. Here's the place to start. Eat 90% of your meals in the form of the following foods. Salads, soups, scrambles, like as in egg scrambles, shakes as in protein shakes, and stir fries. Soups, salads, scrambles, shakes, and stir fries. Soups, salads, scrambles, shakes, and stir fries. These foods are rich in protein, they're rich in fiber, they don't have a lot of carbohydrate or fat in them. They tend to fill you up really quickly. They tend not to overwhelm the mitochondria that are responsible for generating energy out of food. 90% of your meals, soup, salads, scrambles, shakes, and stir fries. And then 10% of your meals are fat, starch, sugar, alcohol, and the things that you like to make your diet doable. Start with that. And then once you start getting feedback from your body. Is your SHMEC in check or not? If it is, keep doing what you're doing. And then check, am I also getting results? Is my body composition, am I losing fat or maintaining a healthy body fat? If SHMEC is in check and you're losing or maintaining optimal body composition, then you have a flexible metabolism. Furthermore, you have found the right approach for you. I don't care if you're eating all junk food. If your SHMEC is in check and you're losing fat, that is the right approach for you. And this is how it's done. It's the only way it has ever been done. So yes, if you want, go ahead and grab, sort of an off-the-shelf program, but realize you're going to have to absorb what is useful, discard what is not, add what is uniquely your own, and pay attention to this trial and error process.
They were some awesome golden nuggets that you just shared with us, Jade. I really appreciate that. And so, going on that note, making sure your SHMEC's in check, and then trying salads, shakes, stir fry, scrambles, and also soups is a really good, like you said, is a really good place to start, because there's nothing, there's nothing processed in there at the start, and that's when you start to retrain your body, retrain your eating habits, retrain your taste to know what's actually going on. Because I feel like a lot of what triggers hunger, what triggers our signal to want more, it's also, like you said, it's those processed foods, because they've been designed that way to actually make us crave those foods. But when you have those whole nutritious foods of the 5 S's, like, your body's going to start to get back in check, and like you said, your SHMEC will eventually be in check.
Yeah, you bring up a great point. One of the things that research is starting to tell us is that there are certain foods and certain food combinations that make our SHMEC go out of check, that make certain people susceptible to cravings and hunger. And the people who are most susceptible are the ones who are most metabolically inflexible. And so one of the things you certainly can begin to do, and you're absolutely right, very astute in that sort of what you saw what I was doing, soup, salad, scramble, shakes, and stir fries, avoid this highly palatable hedonistic combination of salt, sugar, fat, alcohol. Salt, sugar, and fat in combination. And when I say sugar, I also mean starch. Eating a bland, wet, white potato is very different than eating a bland, wet, white potato that's also smothered, covered in, sour cream and cheese and bacon and chives and all of that. One is going to satisfy you, the bland, plain potato. You're not going to be typically able to overeat it. One, you're going to overeat like crazy. And this is another rule, a good rule of metabolic flexibility. It's not that you can't ever have these foods. It's that when these foods start to dominate, you're going to make yourself more metabolically inflexible. The other thing to understand, if you are an overweight person or someone who has food issues, understand those are the foods that might be triggering this off. And so that's how come I often say, if you want to restore metabolic flexibility, one good approach is eat small, frequent meals that are relatively bland, protein rich, and fiber rich. Or as you get more metabolically flexible, like I can do this, and maybe Tyson, you can do this, maybe you go the whole day without eating, and then you can eat what you want. But to me, that is a PhD level metabolic flexibility. Most people need to start at the elementary level, elementary school, like grammar school, the beginning. That would be small, frequent meals. What we're doing in this industry oftentimes, we're taking people who need sort of the grammar school, elementary school process, the basics, and we're trying to make them jump to the advanced. To me, intermittent fasting, a keto diet, and things like that are advanced practices to restore metabolic flexibility. If you're diabetic, it might be your only choice. But if you're just overweight and trying to restore metabolic flexibility, and your coach is giving you a keto diet or intermittent fasting, sure, you might be one of those people who can go cold turkey quitting cigarettes. But most people aren't. Most people are going to need some help. And so you have to manage that. In my advice, my personal advice is, most people will need to start this process with small, frequent meals and then progress the process by either decreasing the meal number, the meal size, or fooling around with meal timing. And then you start getting into meal composition. So eventually you can thrive off of an all high-fat diet. Even better, and this will sort of bring us, I think, as a good segue into the next approach, once you restore some metabolic flexibility, the best approach is to cycle the approach throughout the year. So for me now, during winter, I usually go to a higher protein, higher fat type of diet with very little starches and things like that. When the spring comes around, I sort of up my intake of salads and fruits and things like that. During the summer, especially late summer, you'll see me really increase my carbohydrates and train a lot harder. That happens pretty much to the end of fall. And I cycle it. Sometimes I'm eating more and exercising more. That would be a summertime approach for me. Sometimes I'm eating less and exercising less. That would be sort of a winter time for me. Every once in a blue moon, I'm eating more and exercising less, like over Thanksgiving and the Christmas holidays here. I do that sometimes, eat more and exercise less. Like this morning I had pancakes. I'm not afraid of that because I don't do that day in and day out. And then every once in a while as well, I eat less and exercise more. Understand what we're doing here though, right? Notice how I'm not telling you I'm trying to eat less and exercise more 24/7, 365 days a year. Instead, I'm cycling the approach. And that is how your body maintains metabolic flexibility, to change it and to challenge it and to expose it to different things. And so every once in a while, I'll fast for an entire weekend so that I can test and challenge my metabolic flexibility. I typically do an 8 to 12 week keto diet during the winter so I can challenge my metabolic flexibility. I do spend times where I'm sitting on the couch and eating a lot so I can challenge my metabolic flexibility. And I also spend some time acting like a dieter, eating less and exercising more. But I live most of my time in the eat less, exercise less approach and the eat more, exercise more approach because they're just more balancing. And then every once in a while, I'll go into these other approaches. But this is sort of the practicality of increasing metabolic flexibility. And here's an interesting thing. Some people will be listening to this and they'll be like, Jade, Tyson, I totally get this. I do this naturally. I eat a lot on the days I train. And I eat very little or maybe even intermittent fast on the days I don't train. That is a very good metabolically flexible approach that can restore metabolic flexibility, matching your intake with your output. And so these are all ways of using this concept versus just saying, hey, let me try to speed up my metabolism.
I really, really enjoy that approach of what you do. And it's funny the way you speak about this. I started to pick up on this when I started listening to Ayurveda, and they talk about things with the season. Like, you just don't realize that your body does go on season. You can't be doing the same thing 365 days a year, because we just simply weren't like that. We've never had food access, the exact same type of food for the exact same amount of days, 365 days a year. So being able to cycle your body and get used to times of where it feels like it's a feast mode, and there's famine mode, and there's times where you said you're exercising more and eating more, and there's times where you're exercising less and eating less. Like, integrating those things into your life, you're finding that balance again. It's that biofeedback to see how your body goes. But not everyone's going to be suited for that straight away, are they? Like you said, you've got to build yourself up to this thing. And if you're overweight, the first thing you need to do is you need to pick a plan. You need to follow it. We could go from what you've talked about before, about your S's and your SMEC, and then work your way into this thing. Because what Jade's talking about, guys, like, it's so important to get to this point. But before you run, you have to walk. You have to start taking those small actions first to develop that metabolic flexibility.
Yeah, I oftentimes say, Tyson, it's a process, not a protocol. And what people want is they want to make it a protocol. Do X, Y, Z, and you'll get, A, B, C out of it. Instead, it's a process. You do this, you learn some things. After you learn some things, you change it, you do something else. You learn some more things. You do that, you change it, you learn some more. And eventually, you arrive at a place that is workable for you. And that does take time. Most people don't want to take that time, but there's one rule of life, and that, to me, and it's true in health and fitness as well, the only shortcut is knowing there is no shortcut. So you could try to shortcut it if you want, but you're going to just be spinning your wheels. So the longer you avoid the approach that I'm giving you, the longer you are going to be stuck here, and you're never going to get out of it. So you're going to have to embrace this at some point or another.
Absolutely. I really like that approach. And I think you've given us a lot of takeaways to go away with just to start, grasping this type of concept. The way you presented it, the way you laid it out, you made it extremely easy to understand and comprehend and follow, as opposed to, people talk about, oh, here's my secret, blah, blah. They always try and hide it, they always try and mask it, but you gave us very simple, actionable things that we can do to actually start improving our metabolic flexibility, literally today. People can go away from this podcast right now and decide, okay, I am going to start with either eating less frequent meals and having bigger meals, or I'm going to have more frequent meals and smaller meals, or I'm going to try intermittent fasting. Everyone's got an approach they can go away with and give it a try straight away.
Yeah, I think that, if you can, the person who's listening to this, if they can just essentially say, all right, what I am going to do is start with anything that I feel pulled to. So let's say you've been reading a lot about the keto diet. You love it. You kind of want to try it. You kind of think it might work for you. It just appeals to you on some level. Then fine, try it. Just realize, go back to that analogy of quitting cigarettes. Realize that sometimes going cold turkey can cause problems. And here's the thing that I'll give you guys some insights for you in terms of this. I have people all the time come to me and they say, oh my God, Jade, I'm so excited because I just lost, 20 pounds over the last 3 months. And you know what my reaction to that is? You might think that I'm like, oh my God, that's fantastic, congratulations. My reaction to that is, good job, but now the work starts. Anybody can lose a small amount of weight in a 3-month period of time. However, did the diet you do make you more or less metabolically flexible? Did it make you more or less reliant on a protocol? Did it trap you into only doing things one way, or did you actually learn how to build a diet for yourself? Let me give you an example, right? Let's say you say, Jade, tell me what to eat. And I say, okay, here's a recipe, here's an 8-week program, eat this way, do this thing. And you go and do it. And it works great. And then the 8 weeks ends and you gain some weight back, so you go do it again. and it works great. Then the 8 weeks ends and you go and do it again, and all of a sudden it stops working. Or maybe you have a child, you get pregnant and it stops, and you give birth and it stops working. Or maybe you go through menopause or andropause if you're a dude and it stops working. Or maybe you go through a stressful period or an illness and it stops working. At that point, you're starting the whole thing over again. Now you got to go find another diet, right? But if instead, during that time, you learned how to build this for yourself, then when your metabolism changes, which it will, when you have kids, when you go through stress, if you go through menopause or andropause, your metabolism will change, and you'll know exactly how to find the new dietary plan. And this is the thing that people miss. Learn the process and you'll never have to diet again. Or diet and you'll have a solution for a brief point in time, but it will eventually stop working, and then you'll have to start all over again from scratch. And so to me, this is really the essence of what we're talking about. And yes, there's a science to it, and yes, there's a reason why it works, but it also is an intuitive and it makes sense. There's nothing really magic about this. And as much as you and I could start talking in depth about hormones and insulin and leptin and mitochondria and all the reasons this works, it really is pretty simple. Change and challenge. Same way you grow your mind and make it more resilient is the same way you grow your metabolism and make it more resilient. Change and challenge, change and challenge, change and challenge.
Change and challenge, the 5 S's, and SMUC. I think they're the biggest key things that people can start to associate with to start making it better. Like I said, like making those approaches work for them.
I would agree that that's exactly where they need to start.
It's funny, Jade, like what we've talked about today, like we really only just started to scratch the surface, and I think at one point I'm going to have to get you on for a round 2, because like there's so much information out there that we can go down, but simply there's just not enough time for one podcast. So before I do let you go though, like where can we find more about you and what you do? Because I want people to go and follow you, have a dig in before I bring you back on, so they can kind of be up on a check in what's been happening.
Yeah, I appreciate that, man. Probably the best place to get me is at Jade Teta on Instagram. That's where I'm spending most of my time now. It's sort of seems to be the social media of choice for most people. That might change, but right now at Jade Teta. I also have a podcast on iTunes called the Jade Teta Podcast that gives you a lot of this information. And jadeteta.com is where you can reach me.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Jade. Guys, go back, listen to this podcast again, because you're probably going to miss a few things over the first time listening, but you're never going to get a full grasp the first time. So listen to this again. Go and download Jade's podcast, because I'm sure you're going to pick up so many nuggets there. And then when we get him back on for round 2, you can be up to date on the latest and greatest. So Jade, thank you so much again for coming on, mate. I really appreciate it.
Tyson, thank you, my friend. Thank you for your work. I really appreciate what you're doing.
Thanks, mate. See you guys. Hey, thanks for listening to the podcast. I really appreciate it. So now you've listened all the way to the end. That means you get some free goodies. So what you can do is you've got 2 different options, or you can take them both. I've got an intermittent fasting cheat sheet and a high protein 20 recipe meal guide designed specifically for you in your situation. These meal plans and this intermittent fasting guide are designed to help you burn stubborn belly fat and get in the best shape of your life. So all you have to do is go to the show notes, click on the download link, and they'll get sent straight to your email address. It's as simple as that. They're completely free. They're going to help you transform your body. So go to the show notes now and download your free guides, and I'll speak to you in the next episode.